1370 WOCA.
Pacalo.
All right, 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Beautiful Tuesday morning here in Ocala. Oh, gosh, maybe a week or so ago, a gentleman walked into the studios and came to visit Robin and I in our office and introduced himself and told us he was an author. And we've had that scenario happen quite often, actually. Once in a while, that will happen, and the book will actually be pretty good. In this case, it's outstanding. Dr. Patrick Pacalo is in the studio. Good morning, Doctor, first of all. You are, first of all, an outstanding writer. I think I should call you Professor Pacalo because you've taught me, and I haven't read every book you wrote, but you've taught me a lot about the Cold War that I just never knew or looked at it from a different angle than I've never looked at it before. For the listeners, let me give you a little bit of a rundown on Dr. Pacalo's credentials. He's a captain, AATW. I don't even know what that means. I'll ask him to explain it. He's an officer veteran of the National Guard and U.S. Army Reserve. He served as an intelligence officer in the Reserve 464th Chemical Brigade during the Persian Gulf conflict. He has written and presented papers on the Cold War at numerous universities. You definitely should be called Professor Pacalo. He is a certified safety professional and authorized OSHA Occupational Safety and Health Administration outreach instructor, and a very prolific author, not to say a best-selling author. Dr. Patrick Pacalo, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Larry. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for introducing yourself to us.
Can I send out one greeting?
Sure. My
husband, Joe, is listening. Glad you're supporting me, Joe.
All right. Are you from Ocala originally?
I am not. Youngstown, Ohio is my adopted hometown. Was living there for 23, 25 years, something like that. My family is from there. But I was born at the Naval Hospital in Pensacola, Florida.
Is that right? Okay. Well, thank you for coming into the studio. So you have a few topics you want to talk about, but let's first talk about the book's focus on the Cold War. And, you know, there's a lot about what you write in the books. And to be honest, this is the one I really read the most of right here.
Number one.
Cold Warfare is what it's called, a compact history. I think everybody should read this book. I mean, you've helped me understand what has happened and what continues to happen.
Well,
that really molds the society we live in.
For almost 15 years, I had a Freedom of Information Act relationship with the archivists at the Central Intelligence Agency, and I gleaned a lot from the documents I obtained in their cooperation.
Well, can I interject something right there?
Sure.
That was part of what impressed me, is the fact that you didn't just Google stuff, you did your own research.
Right, and I would recommend a search engine called Web Crawler over Google any day.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is one of the documents I was provided demonstrated, and this is from the intelligence agency, demonstrated that Osama bin Laden did receive indirect aid that was provided to the rebels in Afghanistan from the United States.
Which implies what? What's the implication of that?
The Cold War, there are Cold War overtones in the global war on terror, maybe understanding it. We put aid out there to people, and we didn't necessarily have control over where it went.
You know the movie, the tail wags the dog wags the... What's that movie?
Wagging the dog?
Yeah. You know that whole concept that we're really being manipulated, we as people. Is that kind of what this is pointing to?
Sure. And my goal was to preserve the narrative of the Cold War. And I'm a founding member of the American Cold War Veterans, and essentially that is their mission, to keep Cold War history alive.
And why is that a mission? Why do we need to keep it alive?
I think we can learn from history. I think to get where we're going, we need to know where we've been.
Can you make some connections? In a 25-minute interview, this is where our expertise comes in. You've got so much material here. There's no way we can cover it all. But let's make some connections with things we know. to the Cold War. You mentioned 911 before we went on the air. Make a connection between the Cold War and 911. You mentioned Osama bin Laden already.
Right. I'd like to just put one thing out about the Michael Moore group. You see them on the internet saying things like, steel melts at 2200 degrees or something like that, and jet fuel burns at 1400 degrees. Therefore, there had to be bombs placed in the towers by the government to bring them down. Well, what I learned at Factory Mutual Engineering, the state-of-the-art property conservation course, was that structural steel fails at 1,000 degrees.
Oh,
Okay.
so that makes a big difference.
Where's Robin's voice? So,
That
okay.
makes a big difference in the statement then.
Okay, so, but I heard that the molten that they saw was maybe not necessarily steel. That could have been aluminum. Isn't that true?
I don't know enough about building engineering to.
Okay. And the other thing we heard too, this was from an ABC, what was he called? Journalist, Spencer, was that his name?
I can't remember his last name.
He told us that building number 7 was wired to be brought down because there was so much intelligence in that building. That was always a backup plan. But they didn't want the general public to know that.
I don't believe that.
Really?
Yeah, I believe there is more to 9/11 than we know now. And that brings up another point about Cold War history. I had a Freedom of Information Act request of the CIA for documents for my next book on the Middle East, the Cold War history of the Middle East. And they sent me a letter saying we no longer maintain the Cold War records. Everything dating back to the Office of Strategic Services in World War II has been transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration, so it's more available to the public now.
Okay. So anybody can do the research.
Yes, and Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland.
Make another connection for us. What was the other book you wanted to talk about? The political terror.
Yes.
This part of it.
I can add that in 1981, the Soviet Union was well involved in terrorism. CIA analysis that year said, without indirect Soviet assistance, many terrorist groups would find their operations severely hampered. And I'd like to just quote two things. Alan Welsh Dulles, CIA chief in 1960, said, I do not believe that the Soviets now intend to try to achieve their objective by direct military action. As long as we maintain our own military strength, they will rattle their atomic missiles from time to time for blackmailing purposes, but probably will not use them. Hence, our attack should be against their economic and subversive thrust into the free and uncommitted world. And then 27 years later, Robert M. Gates, deputy director of the CIA, said, throughout the Third World, the Soviet Union and its clients for the past 10 years have incited violence and disorder and sponsored subversion. And in most instances of state support for terrorism, the government involved is tied in some way to the USSR.
Okay. So why? I mean, is it warfare for the sake of warfare? What do they actually want? Do they want to take over the land we live on and have us all speaking Russian? What is the whole point?
That is an excellent question. Terrorism does not necessarily seek to kill as many people as possible. I found references in presidential speeches dating to 1970 to the terrorist problem. And there was even proposed international law on the problem during the Cold War. Let me see, where was I?
Can I tell you what I perceive as the message, and then you correct me if I'm wrong, and correct whoever I'm referencing if they're wrong, okay? The message we get from the media at large is that the terrorists want to change our religion. They don't like our religion. Is there any truth to that at all?
Well, I believe the rank and file of the Middle Eastern terrorist groups like ISIS do subscribe to Islam, but I believe the leadership uses that merely as a recruiting tool.
That's a pretty intelligent thing to say. I mean, obviously, you're the professor here. I think you're right. I've thought that often about us even. I think sometimes they have us manipulated by digging down into whatever's near and dear to us. I think so.
The terrorist you're speaking of?
No. Let me take a break because I don't want you to be confused about what I'm trying to say. We'll be right back.
Brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. On this Tuesday, a sunny day with a high of 70 to 74. It'll be clear and seasonably cool Tuesday night with lows in the 40s. Wednesday, a mostly sunny, nice day with a warmer afternoon, the high 75 to 79. And for Thursday, times of clouds and sun and breezy. There may be an afternoon shower in spots, high 76 to 80. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
When you go into Automax, Marion County's #1 pre-owned dealer for over 15 years, you won't take the new car depreciation because Automax saves you thousands on late model vehicles. Browse the inventory online at automaxocala.com. Then come down to see the great vehicles and upfront pricing in person. Compare up to 60 models inside the climate control showroom. So take your time. No high pressure, no gimmicks, no games. On the corner of 17th and Easy Street. Automax. Quality cars, outlet prices.
All right, 14 minutes before 11 o'clock. Dr. Patrick Pacalo is in the studio. He has authored many books. I would advise you to go to his website, coldwartruth.com, and or go to Amazon. You'll see the books available there as well. Am I right about that? It's on Amazon?
Right now the site's down. We're going to put it back up soon. I take it down from time to time.
Okay. And during the break, I asked Dr. Pacalo if he would allow phone calls. So if you want to call in, you're welcome to do that. Real quick, I just wanted to explain what I was trying to say. In the course of history, not necessarily contemporary history, but I feel like when you read about wars that we've been engaged in, that I feel like sometimes it was really all about maybe oil, or maybe it was about land, or some kind of power struggle that may not have been what it looked like on the surface. And so they would, powers that be, would appeal to our most passionate things, liberty and freedom and religion even, and maybe not religion in our case so much, but just things that we're passionate about. If you show videos of babies being burned at the stake or something like that, they say, "Oh my gosh, let's go get those guys," and that gets us riled up, and that gets us.
Well, sure. I would agree that presidents in the United States have massaged public opinion from time to time, but that is nothing in comparison to the totalitarian system that still exists in China, I would argue, that wanted to control even your thoughts, what you read, what you said, the newspapers, every last word in the domain. Even kids were encouraged to turn their parents in if they said something wrong at home. You just can't compare the two.
And I wasn't trying to. I was just saying that sometimes I think we as people are manipulated by our passions.
Well, I can say this. The first flight of US F-15s to go into Saudi after Saddam burst in and took Kuwait were carrying nuclear weapons. There was this concern that he might make a bolt before our ground forces could deploy for Riyadh and the oil fields. So clearly oil was a big.
All right, I did promise phone calls. Let's take some. Good morning. You're on the air with Dr. Pacalo.
Yes, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
You kind of brushed over that Afghanistan thing, and I thought I'd bring in some background. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded and occupied Afghanistan, and the United States and the United Kingdom gave aid to the guerrilla forces that were fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan, and one of those guerrilla forces was led by Osama bin Laden.
That's absolutely true.
A little.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I go into that in my book.
And I'll ring off and let other people come in.
Yes.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
I would also say that the deployment of British shoulder-fired anti-aircraft blowpipe missiles and U.S. Stinger missiles broke the back of the Soviet occupiers.
Do you think that we will do a better job against ISIS now that Trump is in power? Do you think Obama did a good job against ISIS?
Sure. The Hillary campaign had a plan for the intelligence surge to finish off ISIS. So Trump says we should use air power. However we do it, I I would say it has to be done, but I would like to see us use our covert operations forces and special operations forces to get the innocent people out first.
Can you talk a little bit about the Palestine-Israeli situation? What is your thought on that?
Well, my first thought is that strife, that misery in the Middle East, people and organizations left, right, and center have been profiting on it for decades. The wars go back to 1948, 56, 67, 73, 82, 87. And I believe the people of that region have to come together and solve the problems.
Without help from us?
We should facilitate in any way we can.
The move to put the embassy in Jerusalem, smart move or not smart?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Because of ISIS, their influence, it seems to be waning. But I know there was a pastor that spoke at our church this past Sunday, and he grew his church from 8 people to almost 2,000 in South Africa. And before he came here, he was driving down the road and there was a bomb in his car by ISIS. The car blew up. He was thrown clear, and thank God he lived. But I mean, ISIS is just going to attack anybody and everybody, no matter where they are and what they're doing.
Well, I take prudent protection measures, being in the public eye since 1989, protecting my home and my family, and everybody should. What I'd like to say is there's a Cold War tie to ISIS, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, Libya and Syria were outlaw states, and if you scratched terrorism during the Cold War, you saw Libya and or Syria. I was having a discussion with an NSA man who was in the National Guard, and we bombed Libya with the tie to the Berlin discotheque bombing in, what was that, 83, something like that. And we didn't do anything against Syria during the Cold War. But when I mentioned that to the NSA man, he said, well, that's Mother Russia. And his implication was Syria was under the Soviet nuclear umbrella, and Libya was not. Now, all these former Soviet advisors still seeking meal tickets, I believe they're still involved with ISIS. ISIS came from Libya and Syria, not some, and I differ with Dick Cheney on this, and I think Dick Cheney is a great, great American, but he said ISIS came as a result of pulling out of Iraq and the vacuum theory. I think ISIS put itself in play coming from Libya and Syria.
It's probably more an issue of semantics, but doesn't a Cold War cease to be a Cold War when there's actually bombs being used?
Absolutely. The Cold War was covert and ideological, and I believe that is what defines it. But even in Korea and Vietnam, the more conventional aspects of the war were still sometimes started or dominated by covert operations. So
the whole idea of the old Cold War, the one that Ronald Reagan would speak about, is it connected to the new Cold War? I mean, they say we won the Cold War when the wall came down in Berlin, but that Cold War was already over, wasn't it? Well, the Cold War was declared over in 1960 as well. So, I mean, but so it's the Cold War is not necessarily one war. It's kind of a term that we use for a standoff in a way, isn't it? Yeah, a conflict short of all-out war. But it leads to war. It can. It has. So the idea is to study the Cold War is to understand how to prevent war? Is that fair to say? I don't know if I could give myself that much credit or the other Cold War scholars that much credit. But what I would say is that when the current affairs are settled, covert action is already against the Geneva Conventions in peacetime, and we need some reinforcement of that, maybe in the Congress, maybe in the Security Council or the General Assembly, just like we banned chemical weapons in 1989 and 1991, and no legal state holds those weapons anymore. I think we need to look at covert action. And the illegal states that they don't care about the agreements? No. So they would have chemical weapons.
Quite possibly.
ISIS could easily have chemical weapons.
Yes. We have troops in the Army Chemical Corps and elsewhere that are trained to handle those types of threats.
And your dad, you must have grown up around this with because your dad was a 25-year veteran in Vietnam. He worked for the Pentagon, and he also was involved with safety issues and things on aircraft, just like you are. So this must have sparked your interest when you were very young. Absolutely, and I proudly say that he's a foremost authority on accident investigation, former Safety Department chair, the head of most accident investigation in the Navy for a time when he was in the Pentagon, supported by my mom, a career teacher who is now retired. But that sparked my interest, yes. You've done so much research, and there's no way we can cover it all. And if I can throw you kind of a little bit of a curve at the last, with 5 minutes to go. In your research, was there anything you discovered that was surprising to you? Surprising. Like something you didn't see coming, it never even came to mind? Well, I was kind of surprised at the CIA's honesty. They provided documents that were not necessarily flattering to the agency throughout the years, you know. Is that because they have to? Is there a law that says they have to provide that? Freedom of Information Act. So that's okay. And is that what's in the archives right now, or that's something different? That's been moved to the Cold War records have been moved to the National Archives and Records Administration. Sometimes authors will do research like you've done and form books, fiction based on actual events. It's very refreshing that you have done all of these books that you have done so far on the actual events itself, and nothing is made up. Thank you. Yes. I kind of, if I could be so bold, wanted to juxtapose the pulp fiction defense intelligence industry that has some people believing the United States is one big whacked out intelligence agency. You know, I won't mention any names, but... For the listeners, I want to make sure, do you do speaking engagements? Would you, like if somebody asked you to come speak at their, I don't know, their club or whatever, would you? I've done that. Rotary Club, church groups, book signings. So how did they get a hold of you? Just go, well, you said your website's down right now. Yeah. I can give them my business address. Okay. If that's up to you if you want to give it out on the air. Okay. My name, Patrick Pacalo, Pacalo, 11100 Southwest 93rd Court Road, Suite 10, Box 402, Ocala, Florida, 34481. You wrote one of your books that you provided us was called The Liberty Cipher. Can you expand on that? In 1967, a U.S. electronic intelligence gathering ship was attacked by the Israeli Defense Forces on more than one occasion, nearly sank. 35 Americans died. I believe the IDF knew what it was doing when it attacked that ship. And what do you think about the Cole? The Cole? The bombing of the Cole. The USS Cole. Refresh my memory. Well, that was when they were bombed. The destroyer. Yes. The destroyer. Okay. Yeah. Terrible. You know, these American ships, there was the Stark and the Roberts also attacked in the Persian Gulf. These people put their lives at risk on relatively small ships every single day. Gosh. I think the study of the Cold War, the idea of a Cold War, not the Cold War, as if there's only one, I think what you've done helps us better understand how to keep it cold. Hopefully, I mean that would be the ultimate goal. Is to, if we're never going to get along as human beings, at least maybe we could stop killing each other. Maybe that's the ultimate goal. That would be wonderful. Neighbors might always yell at neighbors, but keep it at yelling, and that's, you know, hopefully they can do better than that. But great writer. Thank you so much for introducing yourself and your work to us, Doctor. Thank you. Dr. Patrick Pacalo. When the website is up, it's not up right now, it will be coldwartruth.com. Thank you, Doctor. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370